There is a particular kind of silence that exists only deep in the wilderness, far from roads, far from streetlights, far from the constant mechanical hum of civilization that most of us have grown so accustomed to that we no longer even hear it. It is not a peaceful silence, not really. It is the silence of a world that existed long before human beings arrived in it, and that will exist long after we are gone. It is patient, ancient, and on certain nights, in certain places, it feels less like an absence of sound and more like something holding its breath. Sarah and Daniel Marsh drove into that silence on a Friday evening in late July of 1998, their headlights cutting twin tunnels through the dark Vermont forest as the road narrowed from 2 lanes to 1, then from pavement to gravel, then from gravel to something barely deserving the name road at all. The GPS had lost signal 40 minutes ago. The last house they had passed had been dark, its windows blank and lightless, a rusted mailbox leaning at the edge of the driveway like a drunk man steadying himself against a wall. They had a hand-drawn map from the property manager, a woman named Carol, who had seemed perfectly pleasant over the phone, though Sarah would later find herself replaying that phone call in her mind, listening for something, some hesitation, some strange note beneath the friendliness that she might have missed. She never found it, which somehow made it worse. The cabin appeared in their headlights like something conjured, a dark timber structure rising out of the pines, its wraparound porch casting deep shadows that the headlights couldn't quite reach. Window boxes with wildflowers, 2 rocking chairs perfectly still in the airless night, and by the front door, a hand-painted wooden sign in cheerful white letters, "Welcome to the quiet." Sarah laughed when she saw it, squeezed Daniel's hand, said something like, "Oh, this is perfect," or "I love it already." One of those small, happy phrases that she would later be unable to remember exactly, though she tried. She tried because that moment, stepping out of the car into the warm July darkness, the smell of pine resin heavy in the air, fireflies drifting at the edge of the tree line like small fallen stars, that was the last moment of true, uncomplicated happiness she would experience for a very long time. She didn't know it then. She wouldn't know it until morning. The first evening was everything a getaway was supposed to be. Daniel built a fire that crackled and spat pleasantly in the stone fireplace. Sarah cooked pasta on the old gas stove, the flame burning slightly blue in the mountain air. They ate at a small wooden table by the window, watching the darkness press itself against the glass, and it felt cozy rather than ominous, the way darkness always feels when you are warm and fed and safe and with someone you love. They sat on the porch until midnight, talking, laughing, watching fireflies. The forest sounds rose and fell around them, crickets, the distant complaint of a great horned owl, the whisper of wind moving high up in the pines. What they didn't hear was the sound of careful footsteps, somewhere out in the dark beyond the tree line, moving slowly and deliberately around the perimeter of the property. They didn't hear it, but it was there. The bedroom was at the back of the cabin, its single window facing the tree line. Sarah had left the curtain open a crack. She liked sleeping with a sliver of outside visible, the habit of a woman who spent her working life in windowless hospital corridors and craved the reassurance of sky. The window was old, its latch a simple hook and eye mechanism that had probably been installed sometime in the 1970s and had not been replaced since. It was the kind of latch a child could open with a butter knife. It was unlocked. So was the front door. Sarah came awake at 3:14 a.m., not gradually, not the slow surfacing of normal waking, but instantly, completely, the way your body wakes you when some part of it has already registered a threat before your conscious mind has caught up. She lay completely still in the dark, eyes open, heart already beating faster than it should have been, and she listened. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, heavy enough to make the old porch boards flex and creak with each step, but spaced far enough apart to suggest someone moving with great care, placing each foot thoughtfully, trying to minimize the sound and not quite succeeding. One step, a pause, another step, another pause, moving from the left side of the porch to the right. then stopping. Sarah reached over in the dark and grabbed Daniel's arm. He came awake with a sharp inhale. She pressed her hand flat over his mouth before he could speak, and in the darkness she felt him go very still as his own hearing caught what hers already had. Silence now. Whoever, whatever, had been on the porch had stopped moving. Daniel got up slowly, every movement careful and deliberate, and crossed to the window. He hooked one finger around the curtain and pulled it back a half-inch, just enough to see the porch. Empty, the rocking chairs still and dark, the porch railing casting a thin shadow in the faint ambient light of the overcast sky. The tree line beyond, a wall of absolute blackness, featureless and impenetrable. He turned back to Sarah, shook his head. Nothing there. They told themselves what frightened people always tell themselves in the dark. Deer, raccoon, old wood settling, the wind, the thousand ordinary explanations that the rational mind offers up like a shield against the possibilities it refuses to consider. They lay back down. And somewhere outside, standing very still in the shadow of the tree line, watching the curtain fall back into place, someone waited. Waited until the light in the bedroom went dark. Waited a little longer after that, then moved toward the cabin. The front door was unlocked. The handle turned without resistance. The door swung inward on hinges that, mercifully, did not creak. And whoever stood in that doorway, in the total darkness of the cabin's interior, with the sleeping couple 30 feet down the hall, that person made a choice. They pulled the door closed again. They walked to the car instead, and they did what they had come to do. Sunday morning came in gold and green, light filtering through the pines in long cathedral shafts that made the forest look almost holy. Birds, the sound of the creek, the smell of coffee that Daniel had started before Sarah was fully awake. For approximately 4 minutes after waking, Sarah felt fine, rested, happy even. Then she remembered the footsteps. They had talked themselves out of it so thoroughly the night before that it took a moment for the memory to reassemble itself. The weight of those slow steps on the old boards, the way her body had come awake before her mind, the primal certainty of danger that no amount of rational explanation had quite managed to extinguish. She told herself again, deer, raccoon, old wood. She followed Daniel to the front door with her coffee mug warm between her palms. He opened the door and stepped out onto the porch and stopped. Sarah walked into his back. The welcome mat had been moved. It was a heavy mat, thick coir, the kind that doesn't blow anywhere in any wind. It had been sitting square in front of the door when they arrived the previous evening. Now it was at the opposite end of the porch, placed with precision, decorative sides still facing up, as if whoever had moved it wanted them to know it had been done deliberately, as if they wanted them to see it and understand. Daniel walked to the porch railing. His face had gone a color Sarah didn't have a name for. Not white exactly, more like the color of something that has had all its warmth suddenly removed. He was looking at the car. The driver's side mirror had been folded in, flat against the door, manually, in an open gravel driveway in the middle of the forest, with no reason in the world for it to have happened by accident. And on the hood of the car, sitting in the exact center, weighted at each corner by a small, smooth stone so it would not blow away, as if someone had chosen those stones carefully, had picked them up from the ground and placed them just so, had taken time, was a photograph. Sarah's hand was shaking when she picked it up. She registered this distantly, the way you register peripheral details when the center of your attention has been seized by something so wrong that your mind is struggling to process it. The photograph was of the two of them, in bed, asleep, shot through the bedroom window from outside, the window she had left the curtain open on, the window that faced the tree line, the window whose latch she had not checked before going to sleep. The image was clear, sharp, taken by someone who knew how to use a camera in low-light conditions, someone who had pressed themselves against the outer wall of the cabin and aimed the lens through that half-inch gap in the curtain. You could see Sarah's face, eyes closed, turned slightly toward the camera as if, even in sleep, Some part of her had known. You could see Daniel's arm across the pillow. You could see the alarm clock on the nightstand, its red digits perfectly legible. 3:14 a.m. The exact minute Sarah had come awake. She turned the photograph over with fingers that felt numb and distant, belonging to someone else, and she read the 4 words written on the back in small, careful red ink. I almost came in. The coffee mug slipped from her other hand and shattered on the porch boards. She didn't hear it. Vermont State Police arrived at the cabin by mid-morning. Sarah and Daniel had driven in white-knuckled silence until they found cell signal, 40 minutes that felt like drowning slowly, and the moment the bars appeared on Sarah's phone, she had called 911 with hands so unsteady she'd had to try the number twice. The forensic team processed the property over 2 full days, and what they found painted a picture so methodical, so patient, so deeply considered, that one of the investigators, a 20-year veteran who had worked homicides across 3 states, later admitted it was one of the most disturbing scenes of his career. Not because of violence, because of the absence of it, because of the cold, deliberate, almost surgical nature of what had been done. Footprints in the soft earth circled the entire cabin, twice. The stride pattern was even and unhurried. Someone who had walked those circles slowly, deliberately, studying the structure from every angle. The prints approached the bedroom window and stopped. The outer sill showed pressure marks consistent with someone leaning against it for an extended period. Looking in, watching them sleep. In the tree line 30 yards from the cabin's front porch, investigators found a flattened depression in the undergrowth. The kind a person makes when they have been sitting or crouching in the same spot for a long time. 2 cigarette butts, both cold, both from the same brand. He had been out there before they went to bed, sitting in the dark, watching the lights in the cabin windows go out one by one, waiting. The front door handle showed no sign of tampering, because it hadn't needed to be tampered with. The door had been unlocked, and the door had been opened. The slight disturbance in the dust on the threshold, barely visible, the kind of detail only a forensic eye would catch, told the story without words. The door had swung inward. Someone had stood in the dark interior of that cabin, in the hallway, 30 feet from where Sarah and Daniel lay sleeping. And then they had turned around, left the photograph instead. The photograph had been taken on a 35mm film camera and developed at a commercial lab, meaning it had been planned, premeditated. Whoever had done this had brought a camera specifically for this purpose, had intended from the beginning to leave the image behind. The photograph was not a mistake or an impulse. It was a message. I was here. I was this close, and I chose to let you know. A suspect was identified 3 weeks after the incident, a 38-year-old man with a documented history of stalking in 2 neighboring states, living 12 miles from the cabin, familiar with the forest, familiar with the property. He had, investigators believed, been watching the cabin for days before Sarah and Daniel arrived. Selecting them, preparing, he was arrested, tried, convicted of criminal stalking and trespassing. He served 3 years. He was released in 2001. His current address is not publicly available. Sarah Marsh checks her locks every night before bed, every door, every window, without exception, without fail. She has done this every single night since the summer of 1998, and she will do it every night for the rest of her life. Not out of paranoia, she is careful to say that, out of knowledge, because she knows something now that most people don't. She knows what it feels like to be chosen, to be studied, to be watched through your own window while you sleep by someone who stood in your unlocked doorway in the dark and decided, for reasons known only to themselves, that tonight was not the night. She knows that the photograph was not left by accident, that those 4 words were not written carelessly, that he wanted her to know exactly how close it had been, exactly how thin the margin was between what happened and what almost happened. I almost came in. Almost. He was in that doorway, in the dark, listening to them breathe, and he chose to walk back out. Nobody knows why. Maybe a sound, maybe a feeling. Maybe he simply wasn't finished yet. Maybe the photograph, the terror it would cause, the way it would hollow out their sense of safety and fill the space with something that would never entirely go away. Maybe that was the point all along. Maybe it was enough. For him, there are people in this world who move through it like shadows, patient, invisible, deliberate, who choose their moments with the cold precision of someone who has learned that the waiting is part of it, that the knowing is part of it. They don't always come in, but they stand in the doorway and they watch you sleep. So tonight, before you close your eyes, before you pull the covers up and let the darkness settle around you and tell yourself that you are safe because you are home, and home is safe, check your locks, check them twice, and if you wake at 3 in the morning to the sound of something